Hi there, I'm Karen Sullivan with Sully's Upcycled. Today we're going to go over the Sully's Upcycled Hoodie pattern, and we'll end up with something like this or like this, and it's going to be with upcycled fabrics specifically. There's two goals really that I had for this pattern. One was that it be beginner friendly. So if you've never made garments before, but you do have a little bit of sewing knowledge, then this is a great start off or a great entry into garment sewing. If you haven't purchased my pattern yet, you can get it on Etsy, and that's Sully's Upcycled on Etsy, and it is the Sully's Upcycled Hoodie pattern. The reason upcycling is so important to me is that we're learning every day about the true cost of fast fashion, and that means fast fabric as well. And the numbers are really kind of scary. The fast fashion industry is responsible for 10% of global carbon emissions and 20% of wastewater. Every year, 85% of clothing is discarded. And while donating to thrift stores feels really good, most of that clothing still ends up in landfills, gets incinerated, or shipped off overseas to other countries where it just becomes mountains of clothing and waste or pollutes waterways. Here's the kicker. We're drinking from a fire hose. 100 billion new garments are made every year, and there's only 8 billion of us. So what are we doing? That's just not sustainable. How can we do our part by buying secondhand, swapping clothing, mending, and having upcycled clothing and textiles that already exist? When you first get your pattern, you're going to notice that it comes in 3 different files, and you'll have to decide what one will work best for you. Most people are going to choose the PDF print at home tiled file. So you tile them together and tape them together. I've just got the first 4 pages printed right here. And in fact, when you first print your pages of the PDF at home printer, you're going to want to just print the first page because it has a scale test on it. You want to make sure that your printer is set to actual or 100%, not to fit to page. That is not what you want. So to know if you're doing it correctly, you print the first page and you make sure that the 2x2 square is actually 2x2. Again, before you print 35 pages, just print the first page. After that, you're gonna get your 35 pages. You can tape each of them together. There's a nice little hexagon that's helpful for lining them up. And there's actually a layout that's also included in your download so that you can see that you're exactly laying out your pattern pieces exactly the way you should. We'll also be going over sizes and what size you might want to use for yourself or for whoever you're making the pattern for. So make sure that you read through all of your instructions before anything else. The second pattern or file that you have as an option is an AO file. So that's going to be large paper that you're going to take the file or send the file to a printer or a copy shop that does large scale printing. It will come in 2 pages and you can cut it out from there. So on this AO, you can see the different colors and lines to show what sizes are available. And there is a size guide that you can also see that there's an extra small all the way up to 3XL. The other file that's available is a projector file, which is a new way of cutting your fabric out. It doesn't require any paper. A lot of people are just starting to use this, and a lot of patterns are just now starting to offer it. So I'm happy that we're able to offer it here too. There's a great Facebook page called Projector Sewing that has so much great information that you should take a look at if you're just interested in learning more about projector sewing. When it comes to actually cutting your fabric, the great part is with upcycled fabrics, you will have a 1-inch hem allowance. And the hem allowance is going to be at the hem of the bodice, the hem of the sleeve, the hem of around your hoodie, and you've got that 1 inch depending on what type of fabric you have. If you have a bulky quilt, you're gonna only wanna fold once at 1 inch. If you have a lighter weight, you can fold twice at a 1/2 inch so you have a nice finished hem. The other beauty is working with upcycled fabrics. You have got a finished edge a lot of the time that you can take advantage of. So what we would do is just get rid of that 1 inch hem allowance since we will not need it. We won't be folding or hemming at all. And we'll go ahead and fold that up and just line up our pattern with the edge of that upcycled fabric and cut from there. That's the beauty of that. You can do that also with the sleeves and the hood. But next we're gonna get started sewing. So before we start assembling our cut pattern pieces that we've already finished, we want to talk about one thing, and that's going to be our seam allowances or our edges and how we're going to finish them. There's 4 different ways to do that. One is nothing at all, and that's a great option. It's embrace the fray. So you can just sew your seams and have a raw edge, and that's okay. However, if you want something that looks a little bit more professionally finished, or you have fabric that might fray a little too easily, that you might have a lot of strings hanging down, you want to finish your seams so that they don't fray. And one way to do that is with a zigzag stitch. So we're going to just get close to the edge of our finished or our unfinished seams, not our finished seams. So none of our hems, just our unfinished seams all the way around every single piece that we've cut. And get close to the edge and just do a zigzag stitch. So that will stop the fray from happening and give us a nice clean edge before we start stitching. Once we've done this around all of our unfinished pieces, we can start stitching them together and assembling our pattern pieces. But before we do that, the third way of doing our finished seams, we did the raw, embrace the fray, nothing. The second one is the zigzag. The third is going to be the serger. So we're going to take these to the serger now, and that's probably how I'm going to finish all of our edges today. But you've got all of those options to choose from. All right, before we get to the serger, we're going to do one other way of finishing our edges, and it's an easy one, and that's pinking shears. Pinking shears have zigzag blade, so they cut a zigzag shape on the edge of your seams, your seam allowance. So what that will do is keep your seams from fraying as much as they would if you just let them raw. It's just a softer fray that might happen there. So that's another easy way to do your finishing your seams. But now we're going to go to the serger. Now a serger is absolutely not necessary. It is very lovely to have, but not necessary. What a serger does is takes 4 threads, sometimes 3, and encases the raw edge. So again, we're going to enclose or at least stitch on all of the raw edges, and it will give a nice, show you here, finished edge. So it's all encased and no fraying will happen, which will be nice. Again, not necessary, but really lovely. All right, so we're about to get ready to assemble, but one thing I want to talk about first is the pocket, and the pocket is the first thing we're going to start with, and it's probably going to take the longest out of everything that we have to do, so stay patient. I also want to say that I lied a little bit. When we did all of our serging or our finished seams, no matter what they are, with the pocket only, we're only going to do these opening seams. And I call it the opening because that's where your hand is going to go into an opening. And that's where we did serge already, but we will serge the rest after. I also want to talk about the fact that we're doing a 1/2 inch and or an inch. We talked about that for the hem, but it's also for the opening as well. So we could do a full inch, iron that down and sew it, or we can do a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch. Now, since we're using a kantha quilt, and that's what this is a kantha quilt, K-A-N-T-H-A. They're made in India, and they're just 2 layers of cotton that are sewn together with these long stitches of string, long stitches of thread. It gives it a nice visual and a nice texture. And because it's made with scraps from saris, I still consider it upcycled. So we will start with this because it is not too thick, and we will do a 1/2 inch. And I'm kind of eyeballing my 1/2 inch. You can measure it if you want, but I think eyeballing it is fine. And then roll it over again for a second 1/2 of an inch. Now, I think that just steaming and ironing this, it's going to stay in place, but if you want, you could clip or use pins at this point too. So I'll do the other side too, but before I do want to talk about if you're using a heavier or thicker or more dense fabric than what I'm using with this comfort quilt, you probably are only going to want to do the 1-inch fold over and sew, because it would be very bulky to fold over a quilt twice. And I'm going to show you an example of that with this. So if we were using a quilt that had that much batting in it and it was that bulky, and I had to fold it over twice, it would be pretty bulky. It would be bulky for my machine. It would also be bulky looking. So we would then just fold that over 1 inch and iron it, probably clip it or pin it, and sew it that way. So we would have the finished edge and we would do that instead. So that's the reason for, and I talk about this in the pattern and in the instructions, that if you're going to use a thicker fabric, a 1-inch hem allowance is perfect. If you're using a thinner fabric or a more malleable, usable, movable, roundable fabric, then you're gonna fold it a 1/2 inch twice, and that'll be nice and flat and look perfect. So we're gonna go ahead and go to the sewing machine now, since we've folded this over twice a 1/2 inch, and we're gonna just stitch that down, and then we'll come back to the serger real quick, and that will be it for the serger. So what we've done so far is stitched down our opening where our hands will be going into the pocket. And that was the 1/2 inch folded twice, and we stitched. And then I finished the serging, or the finished edges here too. So that's the top, the short side, and the bottom. Now at this point, we're almost done and ready to put our pocket onto our bodice. We're gonna fold a 1/2 inch, just like I said in the beginning, and what it says on the pattern is everything is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I am gonna go fold this under a 1/2 inch and iron it down. If I need to, I can use some clips, quilt clips. I like those the best, but you can also use pins as well. And then I'm gonna fold the short ends a 1/2 inch. And again, I'm eyeballing it. You could also mark it from your pattern if you want to be precise, or you can measure it with a measuring tape. And there's another 1/2 inch. Okay, I'll clip those corners too, just to keep those down. Where the most bulk is where it might start to unfold. So there is our kangaroo pocket that we're going to use, and we're going to put that on our bodice. How we're going to do that, I'm going to show you in just a second here. So now we have the front bodice, and we know it's the front bodice because either A, you might have marked it somehow with pinning on a piece of paper or notching it somehow, but you know it because the front bodice has a little bit more of a dip in the front than the back bodice. So we're going to take our front bodice, move it so that we are near the end, because that's where the pocket's going to go. Now, there are some markings on the pattern, but I always just do it myself just because I think it's nice to eyeball where I'm going to put it. And I usually go about 2 inches, or depending, 1.5 inches to 2 inches from the bottom, and I try to center. So how I figure that out is I might fold my bodice in half and mark the middle. So I have the middle, and I'll use a pin, just put a little mark there, and a little mark, probably right about where I'm going to put the pocket, and then very bottom. And that's just going to help me figure out where the center, so I can center the pocket. And then I do the same with the pocket. I'm going to fold it in half, and you noticed I have not sewn the seams down here. They're going to be sewn down as I sew it onto the bodice. So it's in half, and I'm going to put a pin right there at the top just for marking purposes. You can also use a water-soluble marker and just mark it, and then when you wet it or use an iron on it, it will disappear. All right, so now we know where the center is. There's a center pin, there's a center pin, there's a center pin, and there's a center pin. So I'm pretty much in the middle. I'm going to move down, and I'm going to see, just make absolutely sure. I'm going to be about 1.5 inches. I think I'll go 1.5 inches. And about 1.5 inches. And about 1.5 inches. And then I'm just gonna make double sure that I'm the same distance on each side from the corner of the pocket. I think it needs to move over just a hair. That should do it. Boom. And yes, exact. Okay, so this is where our pocket's going to go. This is where it's going to live. So we are now going to remove the pin that I used to mark the center and use it to pin on the pocket so that I can then sew on the pocket. So now we have our pocket placed. Here's a tricky part. Like I said, the pocket is going to take us the longest. Once we're done with this, everything's pretty zoomy. What we don't want to do is sew here. This is where our hands are going to be going in. Ask me how I know this from experience. So we're just going to sew a seam here. We're going to sew a seam here and a seam at the bottom. I will sometimes do a double seam because it just looks good, but I think today we're just going to do an edge stitch, and it's pretty close to the very edge of the fabric, the fold of the fabric here. We're going to go probably about 1/16 to 1/4 inch, somewhere in there. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine and get that done. All right, time to attach the pocket. So I'm going to move the fabric over, and I'm going to start at one corner where it's going to be doubled and doubled. So it's pretty thick right here. And that's the reason for doing a 1 fold or a 2 fold, depending on the thickness of your fabric. I'm going to go right from the very edge and about 1/4 inch, maybe a little less. And I'll go all the way down. And I'm going to finish and then turn. And then again, I'm going to start at the very edge so that it will crisscross seams. Go all the way across the bottom. All right, the pocket is attached. We've sewn all the stitches around, and guess what? We left the openings done. That's a win. Woohoo! Now it's time to attach the bodices together, the front and the back. We always do right sides together. So this is the right side, this is the wrong side. Sometimes some fabrics, it's hard to tell, but you definitely should figure out which is the right side and which is the wrong side before you start cutting. And that way, when it comes to sewing, it'll make things a whole lot easier. So I'm putting right sides together. I'm going to start by lining up the hems since the hems are finished, and we definitely want the hems to match. If they don't match exactly under the armpits, that's okay. Most people won't see it, but we do want it to match exactly at the hem. So that's one of my biggest tips I'm giving you so far today. So we're going to be sewing down the side seams, and then we're also going to be sewing the shoulder seams. So then we're going to head over to the sewing machine again. Oh, one thing, we won't head over to the sewing machine immediately because one thing I didn't do that is really important is ironing after each time you sew, almost every time you sew. And I did not iron the pocket down. So I wanted just to iron those seams that we did. So I'm just going to take this part off real quick. I'll put it back on in a minute. But I'm going to iron the pocket. It's pretty flat, but I still like to iron it down since we're here. All right, I'm going to attach those clips again, and then we're going to head back over to the sewing machine. All right, we're going to start some of our seams now. And remember, we're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and a lot of you have marks on your sewing machines, but you can also measure it across and maybe put a piece of tape there. And I'm going to do the shoulder seams first. And I've been told by a wise sewer that you go from the inside out when you're doing shoulder seams. So that's what we're going to do here. And if you haven't noticed, I'm using an industrial sewing machine. And one of the lovely things about it is it will do the tack stitch before and after automatically. And it also automatically cuts the thread at the end, which is lovely. But a lot of other sewing machines do that too. So there's a lot of top-end home machines that also do that, which is nice. What this machine does not do though is any other kind of stitch. So that's why I had to go downstairs to show you the zigzag stitch. This this machine only does a straight stitch. Shoulder seams done. Now it's time for side seams. Now with the side seams, just like I said with the pinning, I really want this hem to match up. You don't want a wonky hem. So I'm gonna start from the hem so things don't get off if I were to start from the armpit. So I start from the hem. I'm gonna do my 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way up, and then I'll do the other side. All right, big time. So now we're going to go back to the ironing board, and because I think this is so important, it's the secret sauce of having a nicely finished looking handmade garment. So we're gonna go back to the sewing machine, to the ironing board and iron our seams open. Okay, what we're gonna do now is open up the seams and iron them. So that's exactly what we're doing. And these are the finished seams. So whether you did pinking shears, a zigzag stitch, a serger, or you just left them bare, you still want to, after stitching, open up your seams and iron them. So I did that to the shoulder seams. Now I'm doing it to the side seams. All right, and next, so I'm gonna put this aside because next we start the sleeves. So here is our sleeve. And just like, I'm gonna iron that real quick, get the creases out. Just like the hem, I want the hem of the sleeve or the cuff to match perfectly. So I'm gonna start my pinning there. And then I'm gonna take it over to the sewing machine and sew again our 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm gonna go do that now and bringing my sleeves back, and then we will be attaching the sleeves to the bodice. Okay, we finished our seams on our sleeves. We sewed from the hem to the armpit and then ironed open the seams again. So those are done. What we need to do next is turn these right side out. And we're going to now attach them to the bodice. The sleeves, by the way, are the same. The right and left arm are exactly the same. They're symmetrical. There's no difference at all. So you don't have to keep an eye on that, which I did that on purpose. I want it to be as simple as possible. So I'm folding the seam so that the underarm seam and the top of the shoulder, I can mark now with maybe my clips or a pin. And that's how I'm gonna know how to attach it to the bodice. So I'm gonna do, again, right sides together. And that's why this is right side out and this is wrong side out, because I am going to reach in, come to the armpit and pull this sleeve through. And then I'm gonna match, pull it through a little bit more. And I'm gonna match the armpit seam of the bodice to the armpit seam of the sleeve and pin or clip those together. And I'll do the same thing for the top. So I know I marked where the top of my sleeve was, and there is a mark on the pattern that you could mark as well. And I'm gonna attach that to the top seam of the shoulder. And then I'm gonna just ease around with the rest of the sleeve. Fit it in there and pin it before we sew it. And I'll do that to both sides. So just reiterating, right sides together. So the right side and the right side are together. That's how that worked. So we'll do the same thing to the other sleeve. All right, so I have my sleeve opening at the sewing machine now, and I'm gonna go sewing from the inside as opposed to sewing from the outside. And again, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I like to start and finish pretty close to the armpit because again, if there's any type of a mistake, the armpit is not a place that people are gonna see a whole lot. So we're gonna put that, and we're not gonna make mistakes anyway, but just in case, we're gonna go ahead and start it at the armpit. I'm gonna make sure that my seams stay open as I go over them. So take out that little clip, and I go pretty slow because this is a circle. I wanna make sure I get everything lined up, so the seam edges lined up. Now, if for some reason you've got too much fabric on one side compared to the other, then something happened that maybe your seam allowances weren't perfect. But we made sure it fit, obviously, before we started sewing it. So that's one arm. We're gonna go to the other. Start from the inside and start from that armpit or close to it. All right, we're gonna go back to the sewing machine. I'm sorry, to the ironing board again. And I'm gonna iron open these sleeve seams. And then we're gonna do a little try on just in case so that we can see if the length of the sleeves and the length of the bodice is where we want it. Hopefully it is, because we've already got finished seams, but if not, we can make some adjustments at that point. All right. All right, so this is a point that it's good to give it a try to see if your sleeve length and your length is where you want it. And I think we did pretty good. I like this. This is a size medium. I normally wear a size large. And again, in the pattern, it talks a lot more about sizes and how you might decide what size is good for you. So this works out well for me. It fits nicely. And this is without the hood. We're gonna put the hood on next and put the hood on last, and we'll be done. But if you wanted the hoodless option, now's the time to look at this. If we've got a finished seam of either a zigzag or a serged seam, all we would need to do is turn it under a quarter to maybe a little bit more than a quarter inch and sew a seam all the way around. Another option that we discuss in the pattern is also bias binding tape. You could do that, or you could just do a zigzag seam all the way around and let it fray and have that kind of raw edge look, and that would be fine too. So we're gonna take off this hoodie and put the hood on the hoodie. All right, time to sew the two hoodie pieces together. We do have the finished edge. We would have had to, had we not have the finished edge, we would have had to do the double or the single, the 1/2 inch doubled or the 1 inch one time, but we made up for that by when we did the cutting and made sure that we did less 1 inch on the opening of the hood. I think that makes sense. All right, now we're putting it together, the hood openings that have the finished sides together, and of course that is not where we're going to sew. I have the finished edges that are serged, and that's nice because that is the only place that you're going to be seeing one of your seams is going to be on the inside of your hoodie. So we're going to sew that all the way around. And again, want to make sure that where the edges are line up first. All right, so the two places that we do not sew, we just really sew the one big curve all the way around, because this is going to go to the collar of our hoodie, and this is the opening where our head's gonna poke through. So those are two areas we're not going to sew. So we're gonna take this back over to the ironing board and we're going to iron the seam open, and then we're gonna at least clip or pin our hoodie or hood to the rest of the hoodie. Okay, so we've sewn our hood pieces together and I went ahead and ironed the seam open. Just like I said, I do believe it's important to iron each seam open between each time you sew. So our next part is we want right sides together. So I've turned our hoodie with sleeves but no hood, wrong side out. So it's inside out. And we're gonna do right sides together. But first I'm gonna find the center back of the neck piece by folding it in half and meeting the seams, and then I'll mark it with my clip. And I'm gonna do the same for the front. So I know where we're gonna make everything kind of meet, and then we'll ease it in from there. All right, we've got that. Again, right sides together. So this is the hood. This is where the head comes through. This is the neck piece where it attaches, and that's what we're gonna work with right now. So the middle back of the hood is exactly where the seam is. So we're gonna line that seam up with where we put the clip those together. And then I'm gonna go ahead and tuck the hood inside. Remember, they're right sides together. And I'm gonna just start clipping around and easing it in. And we're gonna hope that the front of the hood is gonna cross over just a little. Hopefully no more than an inch, but we're gonna find out here in just a minute. If that's the case, then there's something that we can do to make that okay. And it looks like, look at that. We've got about maybe a little less than an inch from that middle piece. So let's hope the other side is as good. So we're gonna go from the back to the front on the other side now. Voila, about an inch. We've got about an inch, and that's about right. So you can see that crossover right there. And that's about 1 inch of crossover. So I think that's gonna be perfect. So next, we're gonna go back to the sewing machine and sew this on similarly to the pocket. We're gonna work from the inside and go all the way around. All right, ready for our final assembly. We're gonna attach this hood, and again, we have right sides together. This is the back of the hoodie and the back of the neck, and that's where I like to start, just like with everything else, in a place that you might not see it so easily. So I'm gonna go ahead and start at the back seam. And again, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And here we go, we're almost done. All right, now we're going over the part where the hood crosses over, and that can be, especially if you're using a heavy quilt and it's doubled over and you're doubling it over, can be a problematic place. So you might want to use a denim needle, which might have a little more punch to it. But that again, that's when you're gonna be doing the 1 inch seam allowance folded once instead of doubling it up and then doubling it up again is just too much for some sewing machines. So just wanna reiterate that. But we don't have any because we're using the finished edge of this Kantha quilt. And just as a sidebar, a Kantha quilt isn't a bad quilt or fabric to start with when making your hoodie because it's a good weight. There's some really pretty Kantha quilts, and I get mine mostly on Etsy, but I do find them from time to time at thrift stores, which is really nice. And we'll have one more seam to iron open, and that's the neck hole seam. And I'm gonna do that real quick, and then I'm gonna try it on for you. Are you ready? All right, our hoodie is done. Now I hope yours turned out really well too. And I would love for you to share pictures with me either by tagging me on Instagram or sending them to me, whether Instagram or Facebook. If you're not following me on Instagram, please do, because I'm gonna be sharing hacks once every week or 2 weeks of different things that you can do to your hoodie. The no hoodie option, the no pocket option, a cropped hoodie, different lengths of sleeves, adding ruffles, all kinds of things. And if you do a hack, I would really like to see that too. There's so many ideas, it's endless, and I would love to see all the different textiles that you might use. Keep them out of the landfill, that's the whole idea. Hope you had fun, I did.